layer has an impact on all living beings in the world's various aspects of life. Innovation continues to be developed for be a solution to overcome it, so that the ozone layer gradually improves. However, the improvement of the ozone layer doesn't rule out the possibility there are other impacts caused by the solution. One of them, such as changing the use of CFCs to HFCs, which can cause global warming. The Indonesian Green Action Forum held Ozone Day 2022 as a form of concern for protection of the ozone layer and its effects. We believe this is the most suitable topic we need to address at this very moment. We can see the Earth to allow scientists, academics, and environmental workers to share their views and research on this. I'm looking forward to hearing a discussion from you all in this session. Your participation is very much appreciated. I'm proudly announce that we accept more than participants who come from various regions. As you attend this event, I hope we are not only presenting but also making connection with other participants. And last, I'm working with my committee. They are very good. Some of you may have been contacting us in the last 4 months, and we will do in these days. So if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact us. We are here for you. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you so much, Trinsinisi, as the representative of the organizer today for your opening speech. So, ladies and gentlemen, after we hear the opening speech from Sabira and Trinsi, let's continue to our main event, that is the webinar that will be handled and guided by our moderators today. And this presentation webinar will be separated to 2 sessions. The first one is about impact of alternatives to chlorofluorocarbon that will be presented by Ms. Liazat Rabiosi and will be moderated by Hyung Park from Green Environment Youth Korea. So let me introduce Hyung Park and read the resume of her. Hyung Park is the executive of Green Environment Youth Korea and a young professional of Asia Water Council, AWCYP, and she is a BA in Political Science and International Relations. All right, I would like to invite Hyung Park to join me here. Hyung, how are you?
Thank you, Erica, and good day, ladies and gentlemen. I feel privileged to extend my warm welcome to all presented. My name is Hyung Park, a representative of GYK from Korea, as one of the members of AWCYP. Thank you for inviting us as a moderator for today's session. So before we get started, I'd like to introduce the presenter, Ms. Liazat Rabiosi, for the first session. Ms. Liazat Rabiosi is a programming officer at the Ozone Secretariat for the Vienna Convention for the Protection of the Ozone Layer and its Montreal Protocol on substances that deplete the ozone layer. So based on her extensive and practical experience in programming development and management to engage and help businesses and industries to adopt environmentally friendly practices, she will share interesting stories about impact of alternatives to chlorofluorocarbon through today's session. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Ms. Liazat Rabiosi with a big round of applause. And Ms. Liazat Rabiosi, it's over to you.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you clearly.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. I hope you will allow me to share my screen because I have some slides. So I'm very happy to join this event. Thank you very much for inviting the Ozone Secretariat. I'm joining from Nairobi, Kenya, so quite far away from you. So as you can see, it's still early morning. And yeah, I'll make a presentation as requested, introducing the Montreal Protocol and why we celebrate the World Ozone Day on 16th September. So can I share the screen?
Yes.
Okay. So I don't want to take too much time. Open system preferences. Oh. Because I was hoping that we will test a bit this beforehand, but it seems like I cannot share from here. So do the organizers have my slides and they can show it on the screen? That's what happens with the online meetings. I'm sorry about this. Okay, I think I can share myself. So let me do that. And I'll start my presentation. So what can you see my slides?
Yes, we can see it.
You can see them a normal view, right? Just my slides, so as the presenter's view.
I think the screen is for the presenter.
I'm really sorry about that. So let me just. You can see my slides, or you can be presenter view.
We can see your slide, but would you please extend? Yeah, that's
okay, great. So Montreal Protocol, the treaty that protects the ozone layer. The official title is a Montreal Protocol on substances that deplete the ozone layer. Is celebrating its 35th anniversary this year. And the theme of this celebration is global cooperation, protecting life on Earth. So maybe before I go into the specifics of this topic that you assigned to me, let me just remind what we are talking about and why we need to protect the ozone layer. So as you know, the air that is surrounding the Earth is called atmosphere, which is divided into several layers. And the ozone layer is located in stratosphere, which is about 10 to 50 kilometers above the surface of the planet. And so this is, it plays a very important vital role for the planet because it helps to filter and protect plants and humans from harmful UV radiation. It filters out most of the UVC, and it helps to filter most of the intensity of the UVB, ultraviolet B radiation. And you also might have heard about ozone as a part of the air pollution, but this is a result of some chemical reactions that happens from certain volatile organic components. And in this case, the ozone, yes, can be part of the smoke that's created around the cities. But 90% of the naturally occurring ozone is located, concentrated in the stratosphere as a part of the ozone layer. So ozone is type of oxygen molecule that is composed of 3 atoms of oxygen. So it's a naturally occurring gas that is created in the atmosphere when the oxygen is broken down by UV radiation. And that's quite, as I mentioned, a process that happens naturally in the atmosphere when the ozone is created and destroyed in the atmosphere. And it, as I mentioned, plays a very important role for protection of humans from different diseases, most importantly, skin cancer and eye cataract. It also can suppress immune system, which leads to other diseases. It also helps to protect the plants, vegetation that we have, the aquatic ecosystems, and as you know, these ecosystems play important role as carbon sink. So that's also something that I will mention later in terms of the contribution of the Montreal Protocol to climate mitigation. And it has also potentially quite an important impact if we don't protect the ozone layer on the economy, on our economy. So, but about more than a century ago, synthetic gases has been invented to use as refrigerants. So CFC is the most known of them, and it has basically its creation when it has been first synthesized has created a technological revolution. It has been demonstrated to have miracle properties at that time because it was very easy to make it, relatively cheap, and operationally has been very safe to use from operational perspective in many different applications. So the most common now known common ones that we know, and often nowadays is referred as a cooling sector. It's used in the refrigerators, air conditioners inside the cars, especially very important in the tropical regions like Indonesia. But it also has been is used still. This type of gases, refrigerants, in more than 200 subsectors of the economy, such as sprays, aerosols, in firefighting, like halons still used in firefighting in aircrafts under the specific rules of the Montreal Protocol, because there is no, it's called exemption, because there is still no safe and reliable alternative that exists to halons. And it's also used in foam, which is one of the main sectors as well in many developing countries, for insulation, for building and construction, as well as, for example, mattresses or even the soles of the shoes, and still is used in the medical applications, for example, the inhalers. So, and these are three scientists that have discovered the other properties of these miracle chemicals, that Paul Crutzen, Sherwood Rowland, and Mario Molino, who is a scientist from Mexico, hypothesized that some of the components of these man-made chemicals actually destroy the ozone layer. And then I hope you can see on this slide a small animation that shows how it happens, as I was telling you before about ozone formation, and then what the interference of these man-made chemicals creates in the atmosphere and leads to the depletion of ozone gas and the thinning of the ozone layer. And these three scientists actually later on received the Nobel Prize in Chemistry for their contribution in discovering the depletion of the ozone layer and the impacts of these man-made chemicals. And this has led to the international negotiations, which was led by UNEP, United Nations Environment Program. And in 1985, the Vienna Convention for the Protection of the Ozone Layer was signed and adopted by countries. It's now a universally ratified convention, and its main objective is to create international cooperation for scientific research and monitoring of the ozone layer. So it's a framework convention, similar to United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. So, and but later in the same year, 1985, it was discovered that there is a big hole over the Antarctic, and that created the sense of urgency among the experts and country representatives, which led to negotiations and signing of the Montreal Protocol, which is a treaty under the Vienna Convention, and it's a legally binding treaty for parties. meaning that the countries, when they sign this protocol, they have obligations to take certain measures to remove the use of these ozone depleting substances. So by then, it has been already discovered that there are many other chemicals, that halons, methyl bromides, used very widely in agriculture, for example, for the pesticide treatments, also have this effect on ozone depletion. So the Montreal Protocol was signed in 1987, so that's why we celebrate its 35th anniversary, and that's why on 16th of September, which is has been promulgated as a World Ozone Day. And under this Montreal Protocol, countries commit to phase out gradually various types of ozone depleting substances. Up to now, we have 98 of them, different chemicals that countries are phasing out, meaning that they're reducing their use gradually. Montreal Protocol provides financial assistance to developing countries to do so. For example, Indonesia is one of them. One of the key features of the Montreal Protocol is science-based policy making. We have 3 independent scientific panels that provide regular information to parties, to countries, signatories to the Montreal Protocol, to help them to make decisions. And that's why Montreal Protocol has been amended several times to reflect these changes in science and in the technological developments that allow parties to gradually phase out these chemicals. Because of the importance of these chemicals in the economy, we cannot just stop using them. We need to have technological alternatives to them. So, as I mentioned, 96 man-made chemicals, and up to now we achieved 98% of the phase out of these chemicals. And there are many uses for these chemicals. They mainly destroy the ozone layer, but actually they're also quite important. Many of them, including CFC, is also a very potent greenhouse gas. So Montreal Protocol has made a significant contribution to climate mitigation by phasing out these ozone depleting substances. So if you look at the environmental characteristics of these ozone depleting substances, so like this, the main 3 categories that we've been dealing with: CFCs, HCFCs, and currently we started also working on phasing down. So phasing down is not phasing out, but phasing down of hydrofluorocarbons, fluorinated gases, HFCs. And if you look at the 3 main characteristics that we look at is ozone depleting potential, global warming potential, and the atmospheric life, how long they stay in the atmosphere. And the most powerful ODP, ozone depleting potential, is assigned to CFC 11, which is like a baseline against which the other chemicals are assessed for their ozone depleting potential. And the global warming potential, also you can see that they have quite high value and is assigned against the CO2, which we commonly know as a greenhouse gas. So it means that CFC 11, for example, is 4,750 times more potent than CO2 11 in terms of its global warming potential. So these are also very important greenhouse gases, and HFCs, for example, as you know, is part of the control gases under the Paris Agreement, UNFCCC. So the refrigerant evolution, what has Montreal Protocol created in terms of the transition of these refrigerants? So we started with CFC that have been now phased out, but in the world globally, we are not supposed to use them. And there was a ban introduced in 2010 because we have had already a safer alternative, safer in terms of the environmental impact. Currently, many developing countries are still phasing out HCFCs, which, as you can see here, they're ozone depleting, less than CFCs, but still they contribute to the ozone depletion, and they're also quite powerful greenhouse gases. And many countries have been replacing them with HFCs. But HFCs have been also known to be quite benign for the ozone layer. So they don't really deplete the ozone layer, but they are quite strong, powerful greenhouse gases. And that's why the parties in 2016 signed the Kigali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol to start phasing down HFCs and other alternatives that countries now are dealing with and trying to adopt. We call them HFOs. It's still synthetic chemicals and various types of blends, and what we call natural refrigerants, because they are naturally occurring in the atmosphere, in nature, sorry, but they have other side effects that countries need to provide conditions, specific conditions, before they can start using them. So commonly known CO2, ammonia, hydrocarbons. So where do we stand right now? So phased out 99% of the ozone depleting substances, 98% of the controlled uses have been replaced with safer and more effective solutions. And if you look at this graph, so the ozone layer depletion is measured by, or concentration is measured by something called Dobson units. So if its concentration is higher than 220, we can say that ozone layer is safe. And according to the latest scientific predictions, that we are on very much, the ozone layer is very much on the way of for recovery by mid of this century. So the key achievements of the Montreal Protocol, that by doing so, we've stabilized the ozone layer and prevented many diseases that otherwise also would have, of course, had an effect on our economy. We made a very significant contribution in terms of climate mitigation by avoiding around estimated 2.3 degrees Celsius of global warming by the end of this century through phase out of these substances, but also through indirect impact of preservation of carbon sink. As I mentioned, on the Montreal Protocol, we provide significant financial assistance to developing countries, which helps to, of course, these countries also to switch to safer technologies and make the economies more competitive by doing that. And yes, let me continue. As I mentioned, the Kigali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol is celebrating its 35th anniversary, so it's still going on. The work of the Montreal Protocol continues. In 2016, the Kigali Amendment in the capital of Rwanda in Africa, parties adopted the Kigali Amendment for the phase down of HFCs, which are currently used as a main alternative to, as main refrigerant in many applications. But apart from the this gases effect on the environment, we also know that they are used in many types of equipments, as fridges, air conditioners, we refer to as a cooling sector, which has quite a significant indirect impact on climate through the use of electricity, because these air conditioners, refrigerators, they use a lot of electricity, and this is indirect impact of this sector also on the climate. So it's predicted that the Kigali Amendment implementation, the same way, if we implement it the same way as we've been doing with the Montreal Protocol, can prevent up to 0.5 degree Celsius of warming. And plus, if we also, by switching to safer alternative gases, we also introduce energy efficiency measures, then this impact can potentially double by making the Montreal Protocol a significant mitigation contribution against the global warming and climate crisis. So as I said, that if we continue implementing the Montreal Protocol the same way, it will be one of the most cost-effective climate mitigation strategies that we have available. If you're interested to know more about this course and understand most of the participants are the students, so they can join this course where we have different online courses on different other environmental topics and multilateral environmental agreements similar to the Montreal Protocol. So you can find this course online and get a certificate from UN, from United Nations Environment Program by completing this course. We also have some interesting tools that we developed to raise awareness about the ozone layer and the contribution of the Montreal Protocol to climate change. So this is an app and a game called Reset Earth. And as I mentioned, yeah, we celebrate the 60, yesterday we celebrated the World Ozone Day, and for which we usually prepare a lot of material to help countries to celebrate it. And with this, I would like to finalize my presentation. Thank you very much. I'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Yes, thank you for the insights, Ms. Liaza Rabiossi. We really appreciated that through your presentation, we were able to have a useful time to learning about not only what ozone is and its role and importance, but also the international negotiation for protecting the ozone layer and the man-made substances that threaten the ozone layer. And everyone, please give it up for Ms. Liaza Rabiossi one more time. And before we move to the discussion, one of our participants sent 2 questions. However, because of the time limits, we will get the whole questions in the Q&A session at the same time. So now it's time to move to the next page of our first session. We prepared a panel discussion under the same theme, impact of alternatives to chlorofluorocarbon. Dr. Putu Santikayasa from IPB University and Dr. Resti Salamayanti are going to have a discussion. For the first, I would like to introduce Dr. Putu, who has colorful research and programming experience in natural resources, especially the water. And it's my honor to introduce Dr. Resti from IPB University, who has been dedicated to finding practical methods to solve climate-related issues and suggesting various ways to governments all around the world. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Putu and Dr. Resti with a big round of applause. And Dr. Putu and Resti, it's over to you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hayung Park, for the sessions and moderate the sessions. And Ms. Lisa is very interesting presentations about the Montreal Protocol and also international commitment related to the ozone depletions. And as mentioned in the presentation, I also would like to thanks to the organizer for inviting me joining for this very interesting and amazing event. So look at the impact of the chlorofluorocarbon and then the impact of HFC to the ozone, and also change to other like mentions like HFO or natural refrigerant. So one of questions that rise, what the impact of those material to the technology, and how will society adopt this technology? Because if we are we ready for the new technology to adopt the new material, new chemical or unchemical? For example, if we use natural refrigerant to change the CFC or ASC for the refrigerant. So if are we ready for that one? So that's the first question. The second one is, as you mentioned, the phasing down the use of HFC as one of the mitigations option for the climate change. Yeah, as we understand also the impact of the HFC, because they have like long period or long life in the atmosphere. Is there any data how long it will be changed, or the impact is more than CO2. So what about the mitigations option? Is depletion the reductions uses of this HFC is enough, or maybe need for other option? There's two questions for. Thank you very much.
And Dr. Resti, if you have something to tell, please share the information with us, and it's over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Hayong Park, and also Ms. Liazat for the interesting presentations, and also thank you for the committee for the opportunity for me to learn together with the young people that have been attended this conference. And this is very interesting that we know from your presentation that many things have been changing, because there are a lot of new knowledge that can be implemented to protect our environment. And hopefully from this event that many people, especially the young people, can be more aware about our atmosphere, including the ozone layer, and also the impact of the human activities to it, and also our Earth. Yeah, as the request from the committee that we as the panelists have to prepare some questions, and then I have several questions to Ms. Liazat about your presentations. Before, Pak Puto already asked about the relation of this new approach to the climate in the details. And for me, I would like to know more about the implementations. We know that it's a new approach and already be ratified by several countries. I read it in the internet. And how are the implementation so far? And also, how about the other sources of HFC that also be emitted to the atmosphere from the other sources, like from the agricultural and also the feedstock? And the second question is, what are the challenges? Especially from the industrial side, is the technology already available to be adopted by other countries? And also, how is the link between this solution to the country development agenda? I don't know about the cost of this technology. Is it like easy to implement, or yeah, maybe I want to know more about the challenge, and also how to tackle this challenge, and maybe also the future agenda to improve the implementation of this approach. Yeah, that's from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Putu and Resti. And if someone can answer about these questions, please turn on your microphone, and especially Ms. Diaza Rabiusi, please answer these questions, and it's over to you.
Thank you very much for these questions. In terms of the, I understand there are like 4 questions that we have about natural refrigerants, if we are ready to adopt them. I was also hoping that the panelists will provide some of their knowledge to these questions, but as I mentioned in my presentation, and please very much welcome the contribution from the 2 panelists to these questions. In my presentation, currently countries are looking at what we call natural refrigerants as alternatives to adopt. But unfortunately, while they are of course readily available, their adoption process is challenging because of their operational characteristics. So as you know, most of these chemicals like hydrocarbons are flammable. So while they've been already widely adopted to be used in domestic refrigerators and the commercial refrigeration systems, there are still challenges to use them in air conditioners. So it's basically the same type of gas that we use for cooking is also proposed to be used as a refrigerant gas in our room air conditioners. So in Indonesia, I'm sure you all use air conditioners most of the time. And this, of course, has created a challenge in terms of not only the awareness or maybe the fear from the consumers and users to use this kind of equipment, but also the institutional challenges, because the safety standards that we have currently in the, for example, for buildings where these air conditioners are used, do not allow for this kind of flammable substances to be used in equipment, and there are some international processes going on for changing these standards and for changing the design of this equipment so that it allows the use of these flammable substances. For ammonia, for example, which is also one of the oldest refrigerants used in this sector since a long time ago. But then once CFC were discovered, they were much easier to use. People switched, the industry switched to CFCs, but now they're coming back to ammonia as one of the potential alternative. But ammonia is in high concentrations can be toxic toxic for people, basically. Again, represents a public health risk. So again, there are certain changes need to be adopted by the industry, by the government policies for this type of applications to be used safely. For CO2s, if they operate in the closed equipment, they have a high pressure. So maybe Mr. Sunita Kayasa knows more about this than me, but they have a high operational pressure. So again, creates a challenge. And one of the main challenges that would be reverting to the question about challenges is the preparedness of the market to adopt these substances. So for example, what we call the servicing sector, all these technicians who come to your houses, so that you need to invite them from time to time to recharge your air conditioners, also clean them to make them more energy efficient. These people come in many countries from informal sector, and they just don't have basic equipment to remove these substances from the air conditioners safely, and also to operate this, for example, if it's flammable substance inside the air conditioner. Again, to service air conditioners, refrigerants safely. Again, it's an issue of the competence. So this sector also needs to be prepared. And as I mentioned, in many developing countries, I imagine in Indonesia, they have come from informal sector. They don't have enough education, sometimes certificates to work in the sector safely. So these are like quite practical challenges that many countries are currently facing to adopt these refrigerants, even though the equipment is actually already available. Like China, one of the main producers of this type of equipment, they have been producing the air conditioners, room air conditioners with R290, which is hydrocarbons, but unfortunately, because of these institutional challenges and the public perception, they have not been widely used yet. So the Kigali Amendment came into force in 2019, so just a few years ago, and currently in terms of the implementation, where we stand is it has been ratified by 135 countries, which is quite a significant number, but we want to achieve universal ratification as the Montreal Protocol has, and we're expecting more countries to ratify it. And currently countries are collecting data, which they need to submit to the Secretariat where I work, for establishing a baseline. Baseline is like the point from which they will start their phase down process. And next year, 2024, it will be a freeze year when the countries will freeze their consumption of these chemicals at that level. And I also want to highlight that Montreal Protocol controls the production and consumption of these substances. We don't control the emissions, unlike the UNFCCC the Convention, Paris Agreement on climate change. And the countries submit their data annually to us. It's one of their obligations under the Montreal Protocol to show us that they are how they're progressing with the phase out and phase down. So what are the other sources of HFCs, feedstock, and agriculture? Yes, so the HFC is currently being used as an alternative source in other sectors, not only in the cooling sector as we refer to. So that will be under the same, so the Kigali Amendment controls about 18 HFCs and their blends. And so these uses also will be under the control of the Montreal Protocol. What are the challenges? So as I mentioned, some of the challenges already, the operational ones, is also challenging for many developing countries because they're currently still phasing out HCFCs, which in most of the countries, developed world, have been phased out by replacing them with HFCs, but now they also at the same time have to start phasing down HFCs, so it represents a challenge for many countries and for this sector. Another challenge is illegal trade or illegal production. For example, just a few years ago, we had a discovery through actually atmospheric monitoring through scientific data that there has been an increase in concentration of CFCs, which are supposed to be banned from 2010 already. And actually, the scientists could pinpoint that most of these emissions have been happening over Eastern Asia, which larger parts of China, and that allowed the parties of the Montreal Protocol take a swift action, including parties themselves, to crack down illegal production of these substances. So this also represents a challenge because as we phase out some of these substances, they become less available in the market, their prices increase, and of course this creates an incentive for illegal production and trade of these substances. And most of these substances are produced in a few countries and then they're traded through to other countries. So it's a challenge also that ministries of environment in many countries, like in Indonesia as well, that are focal points for the Montreal Protocol, they have to work with customs to train them, to educate them on what substances need to be controlled, what are not allowed. So this also creates a challenge of internal coordination in the governments, and governments are unfortunately not always very work in a very integrated way. So these are some of the challenges. Thank you very much for your questions.
Thank you for the details, Ms. Liza Rabiusi. And I think we naturally move to the Q&A session. And as a variety of information and issues came and went through the first session, I think the participants would also have a lot of questions to you. And actually, we plan to hold a Q&A session for about 10 minutes, but unfortunately, however, due to the time limit, I would like to wrap up the first session of the day after receiving only one or two questions. So one of our participants already written his or her question on the chat box. And first one is, are there any cap and trade system applied for CFC emissions that are considered very potent to lead ozone depletion? And the second one is, are there any mechanisms developed by member states in partnership with the UN environment to ban industries that produce CFC-generated chemicals, since these chemicals are sometimes used for our university studies and possibly used for other purposes? So if Ms. Rabiusi or Dr. Resti or Putu can answer this question, please feel free to turn on your microphone. And I will share the question through the chat box again.
So I will just give some points on these questions, and then I'm happy if the panelists as well contribute to this discussion. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah.
we can hear you clearly. And if Dr. Resti or Putu can answer this question, please feel free to turn on your microphone.
I think you disappeared a little bit. I can't hear you.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, now you're back, yes.
Okay.
So concerning the cap and trade system applied to CFCs, so as I said, we, under the Montreal Protocol, we control the production and consumption of these substances. And there is a specific schedule, phase-out schedule that each country has, depending on their circumstances that they agree to. So we monitor this schedule, that the parties are compliant with their schedule through the annual data that these countries provide to us. In terms of trading, we get the data, usually countries, before supplying this data to us, to the Secretariat, they get it from their customs, where they look, if how much of these substances have been exported and imported. And in terms of capping this trade, there is a quota system that is assigned by as a policy tool by government. Each year they give certain quota for main importers of these gases in a country. And then there is also a legally binding, which is one of the obligations under the Montreal Protocol under Article 4, is to have an operational legislated export and import licensing system for these substances between countries. So, and this licensing system is one of the main source of information also for countries, for governments to submit annual production and consumption data. In terms of mechanisms helping member states to phase out and ban these substances, as I said, CFCs are not supposed to be in use anymore. They might be used in some universities for training purposes, and I hope they're used safely. Yeah, they have been banned since 2010. Under the Montreal Protocol, we have a multilateral fund specifically established for the implementation of the Montreal Protocol, which is funded by about 40 countries, industrialized countries, to give funding to about 144 developing countries for different projects that helps their industries and the governments as well to switch to safer alternatives. So there are different types of projects that are implemented. There are industrial conversion projects. If you have an industry, manufacturing industry that uses these gases, then they could apply for these projects to switch to greener alternatives. And then there are also projects conducted by the government in terms of capacity building, for example, of the customs officials, to so that they can control the trade in these substances. There are information awareness projects as well, such as this one, for example, to raise awareness of public and the consumers who buy this type of equipment, and so that they know which gases are safely used in this equipment. So yeah, there are many different types of projects that countries apply and get the funding for from the multilateral fund.
Okay, yeah, thank you for the detailed reply, Mr. Diaz-Arabi-Olsi, and I hope the question has been solved well. And Yeah, fortunately, we have 4 more times for the Q&A session. So I would like to read one of our participants, Ahmad's question. And he asked about the progress of the government of Indonesia in fulfilling its commitments in lowering or pace of these ozone depleted gas to date. So he asked, who are the most emitters of the gases if we graded the countries based on their economy, developed or developing countries, and also who will be the most penalized for causing the emitters for those countries. So I will share the questions through the chat box again. And if Ms. Laviosi, if you're fine, would you please answer these questions again?
Yes, thank you very much. So Indonesia has been party to the Vienna Convention and Montreal Protocol, to all 4 previous amendments, but not yet to the Kigali Amendment. So we hope that the country will soon ratify it. So this means that currently Indonesia has been phasing out HCFCs. So there is target of phasing out these substances by 35% from the baseline in 2020. And so currently the country will be on the way to going towards the goal of phasing out 65% by 2025. So, and then we hope that Indonesia is in the process of ratifying the Kigali Amendment, which means then they will have to start working on phase down of HFCs. What was the second question? What are the most emitters of the gases if we aggregate? So as I said, we don't really control emissions. So we look at the production and consumption of these gases. And most of the top countries with a demand for cooling, as I said, the sector where these refrigerants are mainly used are actually located in tropical countries naturally. So Indonesia would be one of the top countries with a growing demand for cooling. So in terms of the penalties for causing the emission of these countries, there are different measures that Montreal Protocol prescribes as punishment, if you like, for the countries that are not compliant with their schedule of phase out. We have a specific mechanism called the non-compliance mechanism, and I'm actually this is my job in the Secretariat. I'm a compliance monitoring officer, where we work with a country, with a specific party that maybe is currently not compliant with these targets. We work for helping the country to return to compliance. So Montreal Protocol is known to have this amicable mechanism that helps countries, even if they're maybe not compliant a certain time, but to come back gradually to compliance through the assistance of the parties and the multilateral funds sometimes to come back to compliance. So Montreal Protocol's non-compliance procedure is actually has been used as a blueprint also for many other multilateral environmental agreements in terms of achieving amicable solutions by parties that maybe for various reasons cannot comply with their commitments at certain time.
Yes, thank you for sharing a lot of stories and useful information today. And ladies and gentlemen, please give Ms. Liaza Rabiosi and also Dr. Putu and Resti a big round of applause again. So unfortunately, because of the time limits, we need to move to the token of appreciation session. So last but not least, we prepare a plaque of appreciation that will be awarded. And this award is given to today's speakers and panelists who share their valuable time and stories based on their great experience. So here is a certificate of application of Ms. Liaza Rabiosi. The certificates will be delivered once more as a file after today's event. And ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm round of appreciation to Ms. Liaza Rabiosi. And Ms. Liaza Rabiosi, please look at the camera for the commemorative photo shoot. Okay, yeah. Thank you for your precious time, Ms. Liaza Rabiosi, once again, and I will show the photo. So 3, 2, 1, click. Okay. Yes, now we move to the certificate of appreciation. The next for the panelist. Yes, and these are the certificates of appreciation for Dr. Resti and Dr. Putu. So Dr. Resti and Putu, please turn on your camera for the photo shoot. And yeah, I will count 3. So 3, 2, 1, click. One more time. 3, 2, 1, click. Okay. Yeah, thank you for the precious time, Dr. Putsu and Dr. Resti, and also Dr. Liaza Rabiosi. And for the recap, I'd like to hand it over to our MC, Ms. Erica, and thank you so much for your attention so far.
Thank you so much, Ms. Hayong Park, as our moderator for the first session. And thank you so much for Ms. Liaza Rabiosi as our speaker today, who has presented an amazing and also interesting presentation. And I also, I'm interested about the course that provided by the UN Environment. Maybe for the participant, you can check out that course. And thank you to all the panelists for the first session, Dr. Ipu Tusanti Kayasa and Ms. Resti Salmayanti for your amazing feedback and questions. All right, ladies and gentlemen, before we continue, we are going to have a break for about 10 minutes, and we will go back to continue our webinar for the second session. All right, see you in 10 minutes.
Yuk istirahat 10 menit.
Hanya dari 4 pelajar Indonesia yang bisa melanjutkan pendidikannya ke jenjang kuliah. Dan lebih dari 16 juta siswa SMA tidak dapat melanjutkan pendidikan karena terkendala biaya. Untuk itu, Cicil berdiri kokoh sejak tahun 2016 untuk menyelesaikan masalah kebutuhan pendidikan. Bersama Cicil, mahasiswa bisa meraih cita-citanya. Bersama Cicil, mahasiswa bisa mandiri membiayai kebutuhan pendidikannya. Bersama Cicil, mahasiswa bisa belajar dan mengembangkan kemampuannya. Cicil sebagai platform pembiayaan bertanggung jawab selalu memastikan kepatuhan pada peraturan yang berlaku. Inovasi dan pelayanan dari hati yang membuat Cicil menjadi untuk menjangkau masyarakat yang lebih luas. Dengan kompetensi, integritas, kepedulian, inovasi, dan kepemimpinan, Cicil bersama mahasiswa bisa bersama membangun Indonesia maju.
Climate Smart Forestry Education. Climate Smart Forestry Education is one of the Indonesian Green Action Forum, or IGAF, projects, integrated with the Eco School Initiative at 3 elementary schools, which are SDN 2 Jambu Jepara Jansi, SDN 1 Bojong, and SDN Cihideng Ilir, Bogor Jansi, Indonesia. This education has engaged more than 2,000 students to aware of the importance of tropical forest conservation through pro-climate actions. This education has been integrated into school curriculum, which is in line with Sustainable Development Goals, especially for SDG number 13 and SDG number 15. The novelties of this education are the actualization of scientific students' initiatives into actionable activities, the utilization of attractive activities-based laboratories, and observation in the nature. Also, the engagement of multi-stakeholders without leaving no one behind. In the curriculum, courses, practices, laboratory research, and actionable activities are blended together as an integrative method for reinforcing the pedagogical quality of the schools. Courses dedicated to the students comprise tropical forestry and climate change introduction, biodiversity conservation, forest carbon measurement, biocomposites, agroforestry, and scientific discussion. The teachers harness forest books, prototypes, and promotional goods granted by IPB University, PCF and YES, and UNFAO to educate the students. Compelling games, creativities, and pictures are benefits to attract the interest of the students to learn more about climate-smart forestry. After learning those courses, the students are engaged to conduct laboratory studies, including carbon measurement of local tree species with simple methods, biocomposites production, from lignocellulose waste, and tropical flora and fauna identification. Yet, climate-smart forestry education has been planned to disseminate it to other elementary schools in Serta and Bogor and will be educated to unlucky children in Indonesia to keep conserving tropical forests sustainably. That is because climate-smart forestry education is successfully applied in the previous pioneering schools. Furthermore, IGAF and its partners have also initiated to embark in mutual partnership with local government to get tremendous support in sustaining this education in several schools. Climate-smart forestry education. Climate-smart forestry education is one of the Indonesian Green Action Forum, or IGAF, projects, which is integrated with the Eco School initiative at 3 elementary schools, which are SDN 2 Jambu Jepara Jansi, SDN 1 Bojong, and SDN Cihideng Ilir, Bogor Jansi, Indonesia. This education has engaged more than 2,000 students to aware of the importance of tropical forest conservation through pro-climate actions. This education has been integrated into school curriculum, which is in line with Sustainable Development Goals, especially for SDG number 13 and SDG number 15. The novelties of this education are the actualization of scientific students' initiatives into actionable activities, the utilization of attractive activities-based laboratories, and observation in the nature. Also, the engagement of multi-stakeholders without leaving no one behind. In the curriculum, courses, practices, laboratory research, and actionable activities are blended together as an integrative method for reinforcing the pedagogical quality of the schools. Courses dedicated to the students comprise tropical forestry and climate change introduction, biodiversity conservation, forest carbon measurement, biocomposites, agroforestry, and scientific discussion. The teachers harness forest books, prototypes, and promotional goods granted by IPB University, PCF and YES, and UNFAO to educate the students. Compelling games, creativities, and pictures are benefits to attract the interest of the students to learn more about climate-smart forestry. After learning those courses, the students are engaged to conduct laboratory studies, including carbon measurement of local tree species with simple methods, biocomposites production, from lignocellulose waste, and tropical flora and fauna identification. Yet, climate-smart forestry education has been planned to disseminate it to other elementary schools in Jepara and Bogor and will be educated to unlucky children in Indonesia to keep conserving tropical forests sustainably. That is because climate-smart forestry education is successfully applied in the previous pioneering schools. Furthermore, IGAF and its partners have also initiated to embark in mutual partnership with local government to get tremendous support in sustaining this education in several schools.
feel angry when I see all the plastic waste. It is a problem that we have to deal with. The plastic pollutes our ecosystem and our body. It affects our society in a bad way. We have to stop it. The problem is that people here are not aware of it. We have to teach them how to live a good and environmental friendly life. My prophet and my religion is my inspiration. Islam says that you have to worship the nature. It is a creation of Allah. We have to protect it and we have to serve it. Our helmets protect you and the environment. You are safe, eco-friendly, and look good. We use recycled plastic and natural nanofibers. We put the plastic waste in the economy again and create a circular economy. We create local jobs and are a benefit for our society. My wish for the future of Indonesia is that future generations can grow up like I did, in air and plastic free. I'm Ahmad Solihin. I'm from Indonesia. I'm a researcher at Green Composite Helmet Company.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Zoom meeting for the second session of the Ozone Day webinar. I hope you had a good break because we are going to continue to our amazing presentation from Professor Jeff Albert that will present about the second topic. Operators, can you please share the PPT? All right. So for the second session, the sub-theme is about managing the risk of extreme events and disasters to advance climate change adaptation. And the second session will be handled and moderated by Yongi Ju from Green Environment Youth Korea. So let me introduce Yongi Ju. So Yongi is the member of Green Environment Youth Korea, and she is one of the member of Young Professional of Asian Water Council, AWCYP. She is a BA in Sustainable Development and Cooperation. So I would like to invite Yongi to turn on the camera and join me here. And Yongi, it's over to you.
Yes, thank you, Miss Erica, for introducing me. Please excuse me for wearing a mask. I'm in a shared working space. So, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the second session of the Ozone Days webinar. I hope everyone has freshened up a little. So, my name is Yonghee Ju, and I'll be the moderator for the second session. And I would like to thank IGAF for this invitation. As it has been introduced in the beginning, the second session will be about managing the risks of extreme events and disasters to advance climate change adaptation. And it is my pleasure to introduce our presenter, Professor Jeff Albert. Professor Jeff is the Climate Change Advisor to the National Youth Achievement Award Council, Singapore, and he is also the head of Climate Impacts Branch at the Center for Climate Research, Singapore, Ministry of Sustainability and Environment. Professor Jeff has extensive academic knowledge and practical experiences in the field of climate change. And today he will present about climate changes and their impacts on the environment, extreme events, extreme impacts and disasters, and managing the risks at the local level. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me welcoming Professor Jeff Albert. Professor Jeff, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Yong-hee, for your kind words of introduction, and a very good morning to everyone, or maybe it's a good afternoon, or even good day, wherever you are. Very pleased that you can join us, and it's a real pleasure and honor to be part of the Ozone Day webinar 2022. We're joining you from Singapore, and I'm here at the National Youth Achievement Award Council HQ with the Executive Director, Mr. James So, and the Deputy Director, Ms. Aileen Yap. So today, I'm going to be looking at the very significant topic of climate change. And I'm sure as young people, you've all heard about this topic, and it's an issue of great concern to all of you. So today, the title of my talk is Managing the Risks of Extreme Events and Disasters to Advance Climate Change Adaptation. And I've decided to put a special focus today on agriculture. So during the course of my talk, I'll be covering some of the background to climate change and some of the solutions that we can apply in the field of agriculture to reduce our carbon emissions to the atmosphere. Okay, here we go. So here's an overview of our global climate system. What we do know is that our planet is dynamic, and some people would even say it's alive. And when we look at Earth system dynamics, we're looking at a range of different spheres. So here they are listed. We have here the atmosphere, the air that we're breathing in right now. And we heard about the atmosphere, of course, in the last presentation on the ozone layer. We also have the biosphere, the living component of the Earth system, as well as the land, of course. That's where most of the agriculture takes place, on the land surface to produce our food. We also have the cryosphere, which is a bit of an odd name. That refers to the ice sheets and the glaciers and the ice caps at the north and south of the planet. And of course, we have the hydrosphere, which refers to the cycling of water on our planet, which we call Earth. But in fact, if you think about it, we should call the planet ocean, because 3/4 of our planet is actually covered by the ocean rather than the land. But what fascinates me as a scientist is how these different spheres interact together to provide the life support services that we all depend on, for clean air, for clean water, for clean soils, and the biodiversity that sustains us and our agricultural systems. Next slide. Okay. So when we look at the Earth system, it's pretty amazing. And I'm going to focus on the atmosphere today. And if you think about it, our atmosphere is incredibly fragile and small. So imagine that the world is a basketball, and you took a stamp from Indonesia and pasted it on the basketball. That represents just about the relative thickness of our atmosphere relative to the planet Earth. And what we do know is that the Earth and its atmosphere show strong temperature regulation because of the presence of so-called greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, and others. So we also know that our climate system is driven by the sun, and the chemistry of the atmosphere has a very strong interface with life on the planet. And that science we refer to as the science of biogeochemistry. Okay. So basically, you've all seen this chart, I'm sure. This is showing the increase in the concentration of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere over time. And you can see that zigzag pattern, and also the incessant rise in the concentration of CO2 over time. These measurements are taken at the Mauna Loa Observatory in Hawaii, which is right out there in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. I've been fortunate enough in my lifetime to live in Hawaii, and I would certainly recommend it if you get the chance. It's an absolutely beautiful place. The gentleman that you can see at the top there in the middle, that's David Keeling, and he really had the foresight at the end of the 1950s to begin measurements of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere. And he chose Hawaii because it's a long way from anywhere, so he could get a background measurement. when he started measuring CO2 in the atmosphere, it was at a concentration of about 318 parts per million. Prior to the Industrial Revolution, which started in 1750, actually in my country, I'm from England, in the UK, the concentration was about 280 parts per million. Today at the Mauna Loa Observatory, we're recording concentrations at about 420 parts per million. So that's a 50% increase on pre-industrial levels. So we're now at 150% of pre-industrial levels, and the level is rising at about 2.5 parts per million per year. And this increase that we're seeing is mostly derived from the combustion of fossil fuels, about 3/4 of that. And the rest is derived from things like deforestation and land use change, including agriculture, which I'll go into in a little bit more detail in a moment. So this graph that we're looking at here is showing the increase in the average surface temperature of the Earth over time since about the end of the 19th century, 1880 there. But what I've highlighted in the red ellipse on the top right of that diagram is the strong increase in temperatures that we're seeing, particularly since the start of the millennium, since the year 2000. And what the United Nations is telling us is that we're now seeing an increase in average global surface temperature of about 1.1 degrees centigrade compared to pre-industrial. This may not sound like a lot, but it's already having very serious consequences for weather systems on the planet and the climate itself. The World Meteorological Organization under the United Nations is telling us that the 20 warmest years in recorded history have all occurred in the last 22 years since the beginning of the century. And indeed, the last 7 years are the warmest ever. So this warming trend is intensifying and becoming stronger in recent times, simply because we're emitting more carbon to the atmosphere. So those increases in greenhouse gases are trapping more heat in the Earth atmospheric system, which is causing this rise in temperatures. Next slide, please. So of course, the world came together almost 7 years ago now. So in December 2015, so here we are in September 2022, and the world came together to really try and limit the increase in global temperatures to well below 2 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial levels, and endeavor to limit the rise to no more than 1.5 degrees centigrade. So as I've just mentioned, we're now about 1.1 degrees centigrade. So we're approaching this target of 1.5 really rather quickly. And the latest estimates tell us that it's likely that we'll reach 1.5 degrees centigrade within the next 10 years. So we really are close to the boundary of 1.5, which is increasingly regarded as a boundary which beyond we risk irreversible and abrupt climate change. Very important target. Next slide, please. So a few years after the Paris Agreement in 2018, the United Nations, under the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and I'm very fortunate to be an expert reviewer to the IPCC, came out with a report about this important boundary of 1.5 degrees centigrade. And at the time, the IPCC noted that the current level of warming is already impacting the scale and intensity of extreme weather events around the planet. Heat waves, storms, floods, and wildfires. I don't have to tell you about these things. You just need to turn on the television and watch the news from around the world. And it seems every week there's a different major climate event. So recently, for example, we've been hearing about the major floods in Pakistan, which flooded up to 1/3 of the entire country. And of course, the extremely strong heat waves on the west coast of America, in Europe and southern China, as well as parts of India. So what the United Nations is telling us as a global community is that limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees centigrade requires rapid, far-reaching and unprecedented changes in all aspects of society. And this includes agricultural production of food as well. Next slide. So this is quite a busy slide, but I put it up just to show you where greenhouse gas emissions are coming from by sector. And you can see here that almost 3/4 of the carbon emissions globally are derived from energy extraction and production and use in industry, in transport, and in buildings. And we have a contribution of about 5% from industry, chemical production, and in particular cement production, and also from waste disposal as well, landfills at a few percent. But in green there, you can see the contribution from agriculture, forestry, and land use change at about 18% of the total emissions. So basically what this is saying is how we treat forests, how we develop land for agriculture, and the way that we conduct agriculture has a major effect on carbon emissions and therefore our global climate system. Next slide, please. So when we look more closely at agriculture and the key greenhouse gases, I'm going to start with carbon dioxide because that is the most important greenhouse gas in terms of climate change. And what we can see here is contribution from primarily forest destruction. So when we take down forests, we're impacting the ability of forests to absorb carbon dioxide, and even worse, when we burn vegetation, of course, that trapped carbon dioxide is released to the atmosphere. And when we disturb the underlying soils of forests for agriculture, there's an oxidation process that takes place, and a large amount of carbon dioxide is released to the atmosphere directly from the soils. On the right-hand side there, you can see a picture of a peat bog. So peat bogs are amazing because they're massive reservoirs of carbon comprised of dead organic matter. And of course, when we disturb them, when we drain them, when we burn them, that trapped carbon is released as carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. So these can have massive impacts. So as I said earlier, carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere are now 150% of pre-industrial levels. And this is having a profound impact upon our climate system. Next slide, please. The other gases that I've highlighted in relation to agricultural systems, one is methane. And where is all this methane coming from in agriculture? Well, number one is what we call intensive livestock rearing. So basically ruminant cattle, which digest cellulose through the grass and the cereal crops that they eat through the process of enteric fermentation in their stomach under anaerobic conditions. We get the formation of methane, which is belched out at both ends of the cow and also through their waste production. So this is having an increasing impact in terms of atmospheric concentrations of methane. So when we look at methane as a greenhouse gas, we can measure its warming potential relative to carbon dioxide. So it's about 84 times more powerful as a greenhouse gas than CO2 over a 20-year period, even though we measure concentrations of methane in the atmosphere in parts per billion rather than parts per million for CO2. Very powerful greenhouse gas. And it's now over 260% of its pre-industrial level in the atmosphere. The other major source of methane associated with agriculture is rice production. So again, this relates to what's happening in our soils under anaerobic conditions. Certain bacteria known as methanogens convert the carbon into methane, which is then released to the atmosphere. So this is giving us a clue as to how we can manage agriculture to reduce emissions. Next slide, please. The other greenhouse gas, which is important in relation to agricultural production, is nitrous oxide, N2O. And what we're looking at here is intensive rice production with the use of excess fertilizers. So again, under anaerobic conditions, in the presence of too much ammonium nitrate, this interferes with the nitrogen cycle in the soil. So that graph at the bottom right there is showing the complicated nitrogen cycle, within the red circle on that graph, you can see the process of denitrification. This is where nitrate is released back to the atmosphere as inert nitrogen. But in the presence of too much fertilizer, the conversion process is interfered with and we get a buildup of nitrous oxide. So again, this is our mistreatment of the microbial ecosystem in our soils. Nitrous oxide, again, is a very potent greenhouse gas, almost 300 times more powerful than carbon dioxide. And we're now at 123% of pre-industrial levels in our atmosphere. So we can see that these gases together, CO2, methane, CH4, and nitrous oxide, N2O, are having a very dramatic impact upon atmospheric concentrations, which is driving climate change. And agriculture and land use is a significant portion of that. Next slide, please. So in the last year or so, I certainly have been very busy reviewing the reports from the International Panel on Climate Change under the United Nations, and 3 reports have been released in the last 12 months. The first one was in August last year, so just over a year ago. This was looking at the physical science basis of climate change, so the evidence for climate change. And that report is basically telling us that the recent changes that we're seeing in the climate system are now widespread, rapid, and intensifying, and are really unprecedented in thousands of years. In fact, the concentration of CO2 in our atmosphere is the highest that it has been in at least the last 2 million years. This prompted the UN Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Guterres, upon the release of this report to say, if we do not change course, we risk missing the point where we can avoid runaway climate change. That's climate change temperatures above 1.5 degrees centigrade, and this will have disastrous consequences for young people and the natural ecosystems that sustain all of us. So a very serious statement there from the leader of the United Nations, Mr. Antonio Guterres. Next slide, please. So specifically, the reports from the IPCC over the last 12 months have been warning about changes that we're now witnessing in our climate system. And these are having devastating impacts, not only on global society as a whole, but specifically on agricultural production around the world. So what we're talking about here are extreme heat events, heat waves, which are becoming more frequent and more intense around the world. Heavy rainfall events, so more flooding. I mentioned the flooding in Pakistan. More frequent rainfall events and more intense rainfall coming in a shorter period of time, which is causing these type of flood events. At the other end of the scale, we're also seeing increased droughts. The ones that I mentioned, for example, in America, in Europe and China, are becoming more intense and frequent and of longer duration as well. And I think all around the world, it's fair to say that we're increasingly seeing an increase in the incidence of fire weather and the burning of natural vegetation. This is bad news, of course, because the more forests that burn, the more carbon dioxide is released to the atmosphere, and the warmer the atmosphere becomes, therefore increasing the risk of further fire. This is what we call a positive feedback loop. Certainly in the ocean as well, of course, relevant to aquaculture in this case, our production of food from the ocean, we're seeing increasing evidence of marine heat waves, warming of the ocean, acidification of the ocean through the absorption of carbon dioxide into the world's seas and oceans, and the depletion of oxygen in the oceans as well. So our oceans are changing really quite rapidly. And because it is a connected system, this is risking what we call tipping points in the Earth's climate system, where the rate of change becomes abrupt and accelerates and can become irreversible. Next slide, please. So the United Nations is now telling us that climate change is already affecting every region on the planet. So this is not a future problem. It's a problem today here and now, and the climate system is being impacted in multiple different ways. And these changes will only get worse as we experience increases in further global warming. Next slide, please. So the United Nations has given a warning in their latest report. This was reported in the third report, which came out in April this year, on climate mitigation, how to reduce climate change. And the IPCC said that unless there are immediate, rapid and large-scale reductions in greenhouse gas emissions, including agriculture, then limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees centigrade will be beyond reach. So with that, we have a target towards the middle of the century, which is called the net zero emission target. And basically, we need to halve our carbon emissions by the end of this decade. So we have just over 7 years left to halve our carbon emissions. And by the middle of the century, 2050, we have to be on what's called net zero. That basically means for every ton of carbon that's emitted to the atmosphere, we have to take a ton out of the atmosphere to try and stabilize the climate at any temperature. Net zero. So that's the bad news. I think we have to look at the good news now. And basically, the IPCC is guiding the way here and telling us that there are options available in every sector that can halve emissions by the end of this decade. This includes the energy sector, it includes industry, it includes cities and urban environments, it includes the buildings that we inhabit, that we live and work in, and the transport that we use to travel around. In particular, in the red ellipse there, I've highlighted land use. So as I say, focus on agriculture today. What can we do in agriculture and food production to lower our emissions of carbon to the atmosphere? Next slide, please. So I put up some ideas here and I'm summarizing. So let's start on the top left. Here I'm showing ways in which we can reduce carbon dioxide emissions to the atmosphere. So first and foremost, we have to stop deforestation. The forests are the lungs of the planet that not only provide us with life-giving oxygen, but play an absolutely critical role in sequestering and trapping and locking away carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. If we cut forests or if we stress them too much, they become a carbon source instead of a carbon sink. That is something that we absolutely do not want to happen. As well, we need to preserve our very valuable peatlands, which are massive stores of carbon. Again, if we drain, if we burn them, then we damage their ability to be carbon sinks and they become carbon sources. In terms of agriculture, we can adopt smart techniques and practices within agriculture. For example, intercropping between vegetable crops and even palm oil to increase biodiversity and increase the sequestration, the drawing down carbon into the soils. So soil conservation is very important. Agricultural practices such as zero tillage, where we reduce the oxidation of carbon in the soil, can reduce the emission of carbon to the atmosphere. In terms of cattle and livestock rearing, there are a number of things and a number of technologies that can be adopted to reduce methane emissions from cattle. These include animal and feed management, the formulation of the diet that's fed to the cow or the goat in this case that you can see, and manipulation of the stomach itself to reduce carbon emissions. Lots of new technologies coming in terms of feed management and diet formulation there. The one bottom right in relation to nitrous oxide, basically this revolves around the use of smart fertilizers and using less fertilizers to reduce the emission of nitrous oxide from paddy cultivation. and even using new strains of rice, may be genetically modified, that can grow better under a changing climate and reduce those nitrous oxide emissions. So these are all examples where we can use our knowledge, our technology, and our farming practices to reduce our carbon footprint on planet Earth. So, of course, there's much more detail that I could go into, but I thought we could summarize in the following slide if we can get the video to work. And I think what I'm saying here is, at the end of the day, what we really need to do is completely reimagine our relationship with the natural ecosystem around us. I'm going to get it. Okay, but we can move to the final slide. Next slide. So with that, I'd just like to say fantastic opportunity to work together, to work with youth, to stop climate change and preserve this wonderful, fantastic, biodiverse and beautiful planet Earth that we all inhabit. So with that, I'll stop, and I'd be very pleased to take any questions that you may have. Just to say that you can find me on LinkedIn just by putting in my name there, Jeff Obard. And if you do have any questions for me and you're too shy to voice them out now, then feel free to email me. There's my email there, obardjeff@gmail.com. So with that, I'll say thank you very much, and more than happy to take your questions. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Professor Jeff, for your insightful presentation. It was truly helpful for us to hear from you about the interesting facts on global climate system and climate changes and the ways of managing the impacts of climate change. So everyone, please give it up for Professor Jeff. In order to save time, the Q&A session will take place after the panel discussion. To continue, and this time, I would like to introduce to you our two panelists, Professor Harry Pernomo from IPB University. He is also a scientist at the Center for International Forestry Research, and he has numerous research and field experiences related to forestry in various countries. And Ms. Dita Mutiara Nabella of Serta Ikim Community, where she is the founder. Ms. Dita is also a project manager of the Research Center for Climate Change, University of Indonesia. I will turn the discussion floor to our panelists. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Professor Harry and Ms. Dita.
So thank you, Ms. Moderator, and thanks for excellent presentation, Professor Jeff Obed. So actually, I'm going to Singapore actually by end of this month. Get invitation from Temasek Foundation on climate, mangrove, and peatland. So my first question actually related to the trade-off, the trade-off between ecology, economy, and social. I think that's good to reduce the climate, the emission, but sometimes it will increase the social risk, the economy for community. I think now we have a very clear example. We are experiencing with the increasing of fuel prices, BBM in Indonesia. Something that's good from the climate change. People will use fuel less, as well as give opportunity for alternative fuel energy, make more investment to have a cleaner energy. So it's good for ecology, for climate, but people in say crying, even demonstration coming from students, universities all over the Indonesia. So the trade-off is always happening. Who bear the cost actually for the climate change? This is my first question. The second question is on the geopolitics. You know, climate crisis, food crisis, energy crisis are happening at the same time now. So So I'm a bit wondering with the food crisis, will incentivize government or private sector to convert more forests into food estate. It's already happening in Indonesia actually. Some of forests is converted into cassava. Cassava, they cut down the forest and make a cassava food estate on the behalf of the food crisis. Also, we have an energy crisis now, so incentivize people to grow more oil palm at the cost of forest. So how to understand actually that geopolitics? There is no signal the war between Ukraine and Russia will end soon. So put more pressure to people all over the world to find alternative energy. And the last question is related to the peatland and mangrove. I think I didn't see your picture related to mangrove and peatland actually. So as you see, mangrove and peatland stock carbon more than the mineral land. But again, there's the trade-off between either you want to conserve mangrove and peatland on the cost of sometimes the people livelihood. For instance, Rio is very close to Singapore actually. 50% of that land is peatland. If we conserve the peatland, then no more land for agriculture. People crying. This is kind of situation is happening. And of course, I'm happy that Singapore aims to be hub of carbon credit in the world. I hope will be realized. But sometimes carbon credit is enjoyed now only by big players, not by small scale, small holders that even difficult to understand, to access the carbon finance. Thank you. That's all my question. Again,
thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'll attempt to answer your questions in the best way possible. First of all, we very much look forward to your visit to Singapore, and I hope that we can meet in person when you come over to Singapore. That would be great. I'm an ecologist, by the way, so I'm a big advocate, a big supporter of nature-based solutions to tackle climate change. And you also referred to the current geopolitical situation in terms of energy crisis and food crisis. Clearly, we live in very uncertain times. And I think it's clear for a country like Indonesia, for example, which has a very low per capita emission of carbon compared to other countries around the world, including my own country in the UK, but people are suffering. So there's a disproportionate impact upon people who are not responsible for carbon emissions through climate change. And of course, with the impacts that we're seeing on food production around the world, because of climate change, which are now compounded by geopolitical events, particularly the war in Ukraine, then this is really putting a lot of focus on food security. So what we are seeing all around the world, and you mentioned Indonesia as well, is rapid escalation in food prices, inflation. And this has an interesting interface with agricultural production. So basically what I'm saying here is that we know that the production of meat and livestock for food has a very disproportionate impact upon carbon emissions. So this is why we hear the United Nations encouraging people to eat more plant-based diet. I'm not going to get into the ethics of being a carnivore versus an omnivore or vegetarian, or even a vegan. I think it's everybody's choice. But I think what we are seeing around the world is a move towards more livestock production for meat. And I think one of the greatest things that we can do as individuals is think about our diet, perhaps eat less meat if we can, and also to think very much about food waste. Okay, the reality is that a large proportion of the food that is grown is wasted, and anything that we can do to reduce food waste lowers the carbon footprint. So there are lessons that all countries can learn, whatever part they are on the developmental scale. But of course, as well as I mentioned, there's a huge role for technology and research as well. For example, lowering methane emissions, lowering nitrous oxide emissions, and of course, lowering carbon emissions from carbon dioxide. You mentioned the importance of carbon credits. And I think a country such as Indonesia, which has, of course, fabulous natural wealth and biodiversity, has recognized the value in conserving forests, conserving peatlands, and of course, mangroves as well. And this brings us on to nature-based solutions for restoring these ecosystems. Basically, should Indonesia be paid to A, protect, and B, rewild its ecosystems? And the answer to that question is yes, of course. So richer developed countries should be transferring finance to developing countries to protect their natural biodiversity and develop carbon sinks to offset carbon emissions. It's not the entire solution. We've left it too late for that, but it's certainly part of the equation going forward. So when you visit Singapore, I'd be delighted to speak with you more about that. I hope that answers at least part of your question.
Okay, thank you, Professor Jeff. Okay.
Yeah. Look forward to meeting you.
Thank you very much, Professor Jeff and Professor Harry, for the heartfelt question and discussion. Ms. Dita, please continue.
All right. Am I audible?
Hello.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Hi. Hello, Professor Jeff and Professor Harry. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming to this discussion. It's very interesting discussion, actually. So yeah, I'm Dita. Actually, I'm based in London for now because I'm pursuing my master degree in University College London about environment and sustainable development. But actually, I'm coming from Indonesia, originally from Indonesia. And Prof. Harry is one of my favorite professor in Indonesia. Yeah, it's very honor for me to have panel discussions today. All right, so Prof. Jeff, thank you so much for your extensive explanations about this topic. It's very interesting, obviously. And then I have note several points. The first one is about the source of the emissions. As we can see that energy is a very extensive emissions around the world, but we also have to aware that every country have a different profile of the emissions, right? For example, like Indonesia, maybe Indonesia is more extensive on the land use and land use change, as Prof. Harry already elaborated that Indonesia has a very huge forest and biodiversity, and it can be a challenge and also the opportunity. The challenge is how we can protect that that potential resource, but also we have to aware and there's also the challenge how we can achieve our net zero target with that profile. And then that's the first one. And then the second, no, actually it's not the questions. I just would like to elaborate about it. And then the second one, it's about extreme event and disasters. Yes, the number extreme event and disaster always rising every year. And okay, so but we have to aware that every country also have a different proportions. I mean, like every country has a different proportions for releasing their carbon emissions, right? For example, like maybe more than 70% of the carbon emissions in the world is releasing by only several countries, right? So it's very important to emphasize about the climate justice itself. So climate justice is a very relevant issue, I think, especially for the youths, as we being the next generations, how we can make sure that everyone is responsible to have solutions of the climate crisis itself. I mean, like, I learned a lot when I'm going abroad in the UK, and UK is it's very great for the movement, especially for the youth movement about the climate justice. And I think it can be a lesson learned from Indonesia or from the youth from another country itself, another country too. And also I agree with the reimagines our relationship with the nature, as you already emphasized in the first panel discussions about nature-based solutions and how we have to integrate it. The solutions is coming from the nature itself, so everything is integrated to each other. But maybe my questions, or maybe something that we can elaborate more, is about the role of the youth for this topic. Would you like to tell about us? I mean, like, you have very a lot of experience about the youths, and also about the expertise itself. I mean, like, how you can see, oh, this is what the experts say, but this is actually the potentials that the youth have. Maybe you can more elaborate it about it.
Okay.
And also we know that this year, I mean, like, every year there will be COP27, right? This year, would you like to tell us about what kind of the focus agenda of the COP27 for now, and how we as the youth can engage practically for the global movement? Yeah, maybe you can share it with us. And then and also, since our topic is more likely about the adaptations than the mitigations, is there any different agenda for the COP27 itself about the adaptation and mitigations? As I know that the fund allocations for the adaptations is increasing this year. I don't know, is there any dynamic about the adaptations and mitigations issue in the expert level? And yeah, I think that's it first from me. I just want to elaborate more about the youth engagement, youth movement, and also how we can engage through the global movement.
Certainly, thank you. Thank you for your wonderful questions, points, and I sense your exuberance and passion about this subject, which is shared by many people, particularly young people. Glad to hear that you're in London. It's a big weekend in London, given events with our Queen. So very interesting time to be over there. So first of all, you talked about energy and energy profiles, and in the short time that I have, I would only say that time is running out. We need a radical transition. And what the United Nations is saying is that the funding and level of support for the energy transition to renewables must increase by a factor of 4-fold if we're going to achieve our carbon emission reduction targets. And for countries such as Indonesia, this means technology transfer. It's now cheaper to develop solar and wind energy than coal and oil and gas fossil fuel infrastructure. It makes no economic sense to develop fossil fuel infrastructure anymore because renewables have come down in price. However, for this to happen efficiently for a country such as Indonesia, there needs to be an international transfer of wealth, which is accommodated under the Paris Agreement, $100 billion a year, but the world is not living up to that expectation. So in terms of what needs to happen at COP27, there needs to be increased ambition for financial transfer and support to developing countries to switch from fossil fuels to renewables. That's very clear. Together with support on nature-based solutions and conservation of forests and peatlands, mangroves that we spoke about. In particular, what I'd like to focus on is the role of youth. Okay, and here in Singapore, I'm very proud to be the climate change advisor for the National Youth Achievement Award Council, and we're speaking from their HQ today. And I'm sure many young people who are listening right now are very anxious and concerned about what could happen in the future in terms of climate change. In the UK, you mentioned that there's a youth movement on climate change, and students in Europe tend to be quite vocal. So perhaps we've all heard of the Swedish climate activist Greta Thunberg, who has started a global movement in the youth to go on climate strike, to go on school strike, and basically get adults to wake up and take action. You know, so Greta Thunberg talks about blah, 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 just talking, no action. She's tired of leaders talking without action. So in Singapore, we have taken a completely different approach through the council. So in Singapore, we have, instead of encouraging our youth to go on climate strike, we said, how about we train our youth? How about we guide them to become experts in sustainability? So we have a very specific project that was launched 2 years ago in Singapore through the Youth Council here to train young people from the Institute of Technical Education, ITE, to work with small companies, what we call SMEs, small medium enterprises, to help them cut their carbon emissions. So when we started the project, people said, no, 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 you can't cut carbon emissions because it will cost the business money. So can you imagine a small business during the pandemic trying to cut its carbon emissions, very worried about the future of the business, thinking, well, this is going to cost me money. How can we do this? And our approach was, no, this is a win-win situation. It's possible to cut carbon emissions within a company and save that company money. Could we do that? So we worked very closely with 15 small companies in Singapore, trained young people to conduct audits and reviews of their carbon emissions. And in every single case, all 15 companies cut their carbon emissions and save money. It's what we call a win-win situation, right? And what the students learned was that they can apply their academic skills and their passion for a greener environment, work with companies and grow what we call the green economy. Okay, so we save the companies money, we cut carbon emissions, and I've talked about 15 companies. In Singapore, we have 220,000 small companies, right? I don't know how many you have in Indonesia, but I'm imagining it's more. Imagine if we could cut carbon emissions in all of those companies by training young people on how to cut carbon emissions. We cut emissions, we save the company money, we grow the green economy, we provide young people with jobs, and more importantly, hope for the future. That's the magic formula. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you, Prof. Jeff. I just want to emphasize that this year also Indonesia being a host for G20 and G20, and there's a lot of side event for that, and also especially there's also focus on the youth for Y20, and the main focus is also about renewable energy, how we can net zero transitions. Especially for Indonesia, they have agenda for electrifications, especially for the public transport, and I think that can be one of the solutions to reducing our emissions from the transport sector. So yeah, maybe for the youth here, maybe you can engage more of the G20 agenda, because it's also bring the topic about zero transitions, net zero transitions.
Fantastic. You're right. So of the G20, it's the G7 countries, including my own country, the UK, which is responsible for most of the emissions. Okay, so you talk about equity. So if we had real equity, there would be help from the richest countries to help other countries, including Indonesia, to transition away from fossil fuels as quickly as possible. As I've said now, renewable energy is actually cheaper than fossil fuels. So my wish, my hope, my desire for Indonesia is leave your coal in the ground. You do not need it. Do not burn that coal. prevent that carbon from going to the atmosphere. Instead, rich countries like mine should be giving money to Indonesia to leapfrog away from fossil fuels and develop wind, develop solar, develop geothermal, and at the same time protect your forests and your peatlands and adopt smart agriculture to reduce emissions. Okay, so we're going to be hearing much more about this at COP27, which is based in Egypt this year in November. Okay, so there's going to be a lot of talk about financing the energy transition to help countries like Indonesia move away from fossil fuels. This is the #1 priority. As I said, we've got 7 years left to halve our emissions, and we have to get to net zero by 2050. That is in the lifetime of the majority of people on this call today. Okay, so really my hope is in young people. Once young people realize what's going on and they can contribute to the solution, then in my experience, there's no stopping them. So youth power, youth passion is the key to solving the climate crisis.
Yeah, agree. Thank you, Prof.
Yeah, all the best. Thank you.
I just want to say something, Professor Jeff. Yeah, there is a lot of advocation noise moving to something like an electric vehicle.
Yes.
But Indonesia, for instance, 65% of electricity actually coming from coal-based plant.
Yeah.
This is sometimes the paradox. Yeah. We want to have an electric car, but the electricity itself coming from coal. And the second one would like to also the role of China and India. You know, for instance, on the palm oil with the EU deforestation regulation now, there is a coming out. Then it's quite difficult to export palm oil to EU if it is not certified. But leakage is very big. Yeah, we can just export to China and India, and their economy actually grow much faster than EU and UK, right?
Yes.
So
it's a very challenging problem, isn't it? Well, first of all, I do believe in electrification. So you mentioned electric cars. Of course, one of the major challenges that we face globally is air pollution from the combustion of fossil fuels. And this is having a major impact. I think it's responsible now for over 10 million deaths per year. So basically, if we reduce emissions from vehicles, that's good in terms of public health. However, if we produce that electricity from burning fossil fuels at a power station, how does that help climate change? So, of course, that electricity must come from green and renewable sources. Whether that includes palm oil is debatable. You know, if we're removing forests and carbon sinks to produce palm plantations, that's obviously controversial. And I don't think we've got time to go into that here today. But overall, we must reduce our carbon emissions. That's #1 priority, coupled with carbon capture and storage. This is an evolving technology, and I feel sometimes it's misused. It's almost an excuse to carry on burning fossil fuels. But lately, there's been more emphasis on things like carbon dioxide removal technology. Now, of course, in nature terms, we call that a tree. You know, trees are the best carbon dioxide removal technology that nature has invented. But what we're now seeing is a surge of investment into machines, technology that can actually extract carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. And we can choose to bury that carbon away underground, or we can actually use technologies that convert that carbon dioxide into useful products, including carbon neutral fuel. So we've heard of green hydrogen, for example. But in all of this, we have to be very careful and I think very honest and ask the right questions about life cycle carbon emissions. Are we truly reducing the carbon? Are we just offsetting it and emitting it somewhere else or at a different time. So it's clear that number one priority absolutely is reducing carbon emissions. Unfortunately, even if we get to net zero by 2050, that still leaves an overburden of carbon in our atmosphere, and a number, a rather scary number, how much carbon dioxide do we actually need to remove mid-century? It's about 10,000 billion tons, 10 gigatons. That's an awful lot, and if we look at that in terms of forests, we know that the world has lost about half of its forests, and it's about the equivalent of the amount of CO2 that's taken up by the remaining forests. So we would actually need to double forest cover to wipe out that 10 gigatons. So this is where there is focus on new technologies that can speed up the removal. I don't have time to go into that here, but these are called carbon dioxide removal technologies. And big companies like Microsoft, for example, Bill Gates is investing his money in these new technologies in the hope that they can help lower the overall level of CO2 in the atmosphere. So I think, it's a concerning time, but it's also an exciting time in terms of the research that's being done internationally to solve the climate crisis.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Professor Jeff, Professor Harry, and Ms. Dita for the interesting discussion session. Personally, it was fascinating to hear about youth participation in climate change. And I believe the discussion must have left some audience with different thoughts. But however, due to time constraints, I think we can just entertain one question from the audience. And I've noticed that Anonym has left a question in the chat box. Oh, wait. Participant Vicky Harzaditya, I think you have a question. Please turn on the mic if you like to ask questions.
Thank you. I'm audible now?
Oh, yes, we can hear you well.
Okay, thank you. So good morning, Professor Jeff. My name is Vicky Hazadita from Sumatera Institute of Technology. My subject is atmospheric science, atmospheric and planetary science. So yes, I have my focus concerning on related on atmospheric problem, including the climate change. So I have had to express my concern that yes, we really need to move on from fossil fuels for use in especially in energy production industry and energy production and transportation. But we also see that we have mostly using fossil fuels for steel and other metals production. And so I have a concern. I was very concerned that yes, we already have alternative for it, but it will require time and money and also funds to passing out the touch from using the fossil fuel to attach to the alternative fuel. And companies doesn't want, and what's general knowledge that companies doesn't want to get just want to get what is the word? Sorry, I forgot that. But and the problem is our touch research development and the R&D are, so as far as I can know, it was excessively slow. It was too slow to catch up with our goals to suppress our greenhouse gas emission in 2030 by 50%, and it must be in net zero, totally net zero in 2050. And not to mention that we have also problems in our bureaucracy in our government. Yeah, and they are still, apparently our government is still quite pragmatic. And well, our president maybe our president or our world, our country leaders are maybe wishing that we have to moving out to much alternative clean energy, but some of the others are expressed in parliaments are still quite pragmatic. And not to mention that they might have some dark and shady agreements with some companies, and that's what we call mafias.
Okay.
So
yeah.
So what you have this might be running more deeply into politics, but yeah, we wish to avoid politics as much as possible. So what do you think about
Okay.
it? And
Thank you.
how quickly we can do that? And so because this problem cannot be solved from bottom to top, but it must be top to bottom, because our main stumbling block is come from the top. So that's what I think.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Well, first of all, I'd like to congratulate you on studying atmospheric sciences and climate change. It's really great to hear that young people like yourself are studying this for a profession. So that's really good news to hear. I don't particularly want to comment on the political situation in Indonesia, but you've outlined some of the challenges there in terms of getting action from the top. My comment there would be, Indonesia is not alone. So if you look at the leadership or so-called leadership, for example, in the United States of America, I think we're all aware of the problems in getting anything done worthwhile in terms of tackling climate change. Okay. But the science is extremely clear, of course, and the science says that if we don't halve emissions, and if we don't get to net zero, then we're going to face abrupt, irreversible, and even catastrophic changes in the climate system. So where does that leave us all? And it is important that we think about this in terms of our own personal lives and how we live our lives and our lifestyle. We can all make choices about the way we travel, how we heat and cool our homes, and our diets, and so on. But at the end of the day, we have to embrace the science, okay? And the research that's going on around the world is fantastic. And in terms of the energy transition, we're now at a critical inflection point where, as I say, it's actually cheaper to develop and use renewable energy than conventional fossil fuels. So the market conditions are right, the science is right, and the need for action is now. So I think when you put that together and combine it with the desire of young people for change, that is the ingredient for success. In terms of the technologies that I mentioned, I do believe that we will have a carbon overshoot. Emissions continue to go up, not down. They're actually moving in the wrong direction. And I just read in the new report from the United Nations that, in fact, the level of carbon emission to the atmosphere around the world is actually higher than pre-pandemic levels. So we had a dip during the pandemic. They're now higher than before the pandemic. So we're moving actually in the wrong direction, which is not good. But I think we have to have hope, and we have to have good science. So I would encourage everybody to embrace the science, understand the climate science, read the reports from the United Nations, and watch what's happening around the world, and empower yourselves with knowledge and take the right action, okay, through your youth councils, wherever you happen to be, wherever you happen to live, and get this topic discussed and on the agenda through your youth councils and action groups, and lobby the people in power. You know, we don't want any more blah, blah, blah. As Greta says, we want real action. So I encourage all of you to do that in a sensible, smart way. And I wish you all the best in your future. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Vicky, for the detailed question, and thank you, Professor Jeff, for the comprehensive answer. Sorry, but we are running out of time, so I think we have to move on to the next part. Please understand this situation. And lastly, before we move on to closing the seminar, I would like to present a token of appreciation to our speaker and panelists who have inspired us with their presentation and discussions. So first, to Professor Jeff, this certificate of appreciation will be presented to you afterwards in the file. Okay, and I think we have to take a short picture. So I'll take the picture now. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Oh, sorry. Okay, and
Ready?
next, yes, and next for our panelists, this certificate of appreciation is presented to Ms. Mutiara Nabella and Professor Henry Pornomo. So I'll take the picture in 3, 2, 1. Okay. Thank you so much for your precious time and your knowledge that we have received from you. And so please, everyone, give them a big round of applause. And it was an honor for me to be part of today's webinar as moderator. Thank you, everyone, again, for joining us at the Ozone Day 2022 International Webinar. Ms. Erica, please continue. The floor is yours.
All right, thank you so much, Yongi Ju, as our moderator for the second session of the webinar. And thank you so much for Professor Jeff Obert as our speakers that has given an amazing presentation. And thank you to the panelists, Pak Heri Purnomo dan Kak Dita Mutiara Nabila for your amazing feedback and questions and also discussions. And we are going to continue to the token of appreciation for our moderators. I would like to give a certificate of appreciations to our moderators today. Please, next slide, please. All right, the first certificate of appreciation will be given to Hayong Park. So Hayong, can you please join me here for the operator? Can you please spotlight Hayong? All right, this certificate of appreciation is for Hayong Park as our moderator for the International Ozone Day webinar by Indonesian Green Action Forum IPB. The certificate will be sent to you by file. Okay, let's take a picture together. Hayong, are you ready? All right, I will count to 3. 1, 2, 3. All right. Once again. 1, 2, 3. All right, thank you so much, Hayong. And the next one is a certificate of appreciation for Yongi as the moderator of the second session of International Ozone Layer. All right, let's take a picture together, Yongi. Are you ready? Okay, I will count to 3. 1, 2, 3. Okay, once again. 1, 2, 3. All right, thank you so much, Yongi, and also Hayong for your time today. Please give applause for our moderators. All right, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to inform to all the participants that after this, we are going to share the attendance list to fill in for the participants, because the e-certificates that you will get will be given after you fill the attendance list. All right. And to all the participants, let's have a photo session together before we continue to our next agenda. To all participants, can you please open your camera? And maybe for the operator, can you please turn on your share screen for a bit? Because we are going to have a photo session with 265 participants. Wow, it's a big number. Okay. For the operator, can you please turn off your share screen? All right. Please turn on your camera. Okay, I see in the second slide, you have turned on your camera. Okay, I will wait until, I will wait for 1 minute. Take a picture. Okay. Wow, there's so many participants today. 267, including me. All right. I think we can take a picture together. Please give your best smile and I will count to 3. 1, 2, 3. Okay, going to the second slide. 1, 2, 3. See. Okay, I see some of you give a like this pose. Okay, for the third slide. 1, 2, 3. Okay, because the 4th and until 11th slide did not open your camera, I think it's enough for the photo session. Once again, thank you so much to all the moderators, to panelists, and also the presenters, the speakers for your amazing performance today. And we will continue to one of the most awaited agenda for Ozone Day 2022 webinar, which is the announcement about poster design competition. Okay, so I have the name of the winner for the poster design competition. So let's see, let's announce the winner. All right. All right, Ozone Day Competition 2022 winner announcement for the poster design competition. The first category is the favorite poster. Can you please go to the next slide? All right. Oh, for the third winner first. Okay, the third winner for poster competition goes to Said Akmal Basori. Congratulations to Said for winning the third place of the poster design competition. All right, go to the next slide. The second winner of the poster design competition goes to I Gusti A.A. Gangga Samala Dewi. Congratulations, Gusti. Let's give applause to our third and second winner. And the first winner of the poster design competition goes to Nyoman Putri Ari Amelinda. Congratulations, Nyoman. And we still have one more place for the favorite poster. The favorite poster goes to Celiana. Congratulations, Celiana. Okay, please give applause to our winner for the poster design competition. So for the essay competition will be announced directly by the committee, by the organizers, and it will be shared to our social media, Ozone Day social media. Please follow and check out to Ozone Day 22 Instagram account. Okay, once again, thank you so much and congratulations to all the winners. And ladies and gentlemen, after we going into several agenda today, presentation and also panel discussion, Q&A, and Ozone Day competition announcement, we are now at the end of our event today. I would like to express my appreciation to all participants, speakers, moderators, and panelists who participated in today's event. And we hope you get new knowledge, insight from today's discussion. Once again, I want to remind you that don't forget to fill the attendance list because the certificate will be sent after you fill in the attendance list. All right, I am Erika Mutiara signing out. Thank you so much and have a great day. Bye.
We can leave now. Yeah.
Thank you. See you on another event.
I feel angry when I see all the plastic waste. It is a problem that we have to deal with. The plastic pollutes our ecosystem.
Climate Smart Forestry Education. Climate Smart Forestry Education is one of the Indonesian Green Action Forum, or IGAF, projects, which is integrated with the Eco School Initiative at 3 elementary schools, which are SDN 2 Jambu Jepara Jansi, SDN 1 Bojong, and SDN Cihideng Ilir, Bogor Jansi, Indonesia. This education has engaged more than 2,000 students to aware of the importance of tropical forest conservation through pro-climate actions. This education has been integrated into school curriculum, which is in line with Sustainable Development Goals, especially for SDG number 13 and SDG number 15. The novelties of this education are the actualization of scientific students' initiatives into actionable activities, the utilization of attractive activities-based laboratories, and observation in the nature. Also, the engagement of multi-stakeholders without leaving no one behind. In the curriculum, courses, practices, laboratory research, and actionable activities are blended together as an integrative method for reinforcing the pedagogical quality of the schools. Courses educated to the students comprise tropical forestry and climate change introduction, biodiversity conservation, forest carbon measurement, biocomposites, agroforestry, and scientific discussion. The teachers harness forest books, prototypes, and promotional goods granted by IPB University, PCF and YES, and Umumnya UNFAO to educate the students. Compelling games, creativities, and pictures are benefits to attract the interest of the students to learn more about climate-smart forestry. After learning those courses, the students are engaged to conduct laboratory studies, including carbon measurement of local tree species with simple methods, biocomposites production from lignocellulose waste, and tropical flora and fauna identification. Yet, climate-smart forestry education has been planned to disseminate it to other elementary schools in Jepara and Bogor Regency, and will be educated to unlucky children in Indonesia to keep conserving tropical forests sustainably. That is because climate-smart forestry education is successfully applied in the previous pioneering schools. Furthermore, IGAF and its partners have also initiated to embark in mutual partnership with local government to get tremendous support in sustaining this education in several schools.